I know you, right? And I know what things intrigue you, what things feel romantic to you, what feels intimate to you. Getting into marriage, I had to realize that I still had to do all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
What's happening, people?
Hey, y'all.
From the Williams.
With love.
With love. We got a special one for y'all today.
Because it's February. And that is the month of...
Love. And Black History.
Yes, but 365 Black History in this house.
Make history every day. I don't need a month.
Oh, okay.
It felt right. So what we talking about today?
S-E-X. That's how it goes.
That is how it goes. I was going to say, let's talk about sex, baby.
Let's talk about you and me.
Yeah. That's how I envision it going.
I mean, lots of songs that you can reference here.
It's so many. It's so many. But...
It's the science of penny jumper. Oh, 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 oh. Okay. Sorry, we're getting serious again.
Serious now. But honestly, sex is a topic that I personally don't hear talked about a lot, especially in the perspective of how it changes throughout the phases of your relationship, which was something that I had to learn the hard way.
You wasn't ready.
I was not ready. So I figured, we figured that we could talk about our journey.
Yep.
From college dating, what it looked like then, through post-college, into engagement, which you all know a little bit about already, what it looked like, early marriage, and into a parenting phase.
It's real.
It looked different in all of those phases.
It did.
And it caused a lot of growth.
I'm glad you put it like that. A lot of growth.
I honestly do feel like it. It was tough lessons, right, over the time, but I do believe and feel that we've both grown throughout all of those phases.
I agree with that. Yeah. So?
You ready to dive in? 'Cause I'm about to
dive in. Let's go.
So, I will say, for me, starting in our relationship, we've already given the disclaimer that before marriage, we indulged in sexual activity. The things that we hear growing up, especially black, young, in the South, religion is big. Your parents always tell you, don't have sex before marriage. Was there any other context that was given to you?
You gonna get pregnant, he gonna leave you.
Oh, dang.
Nah, but no, not a whole lot of context really. I think the biggest things were, these things could happen. These things could put you in situations that you aren't ready for and that you don't want to be in. So the best way to avoid them be to abstain completely.
I mean, that's more than I got. I really just, God says, don't have sex before marriage. So don't have sex before marriage. That was really all to it. I think we were able, in hindsight, through our experiences, and even when we did that book study with relationship goals, to kind of think about, the different ways that it could have been phrased to us, or how we want to tell Brooke when, she gets older, how we want to talk about it, like all the things that do happen when it happens outside of the confines of marriage. And we learned a lot of those lessons along the way. In the beginning, it was easy. We were young and carefree.
And listening to a lot of Trey songs.
Because around that time, it was Ready in Anticipation. Yeah. And
we'll leave it at that.
I always try to explain it as exploring. We're having fun. We're in We're in college. We're just living and enjoying our relationship, and that happened to be a part of it. And there weren't really any complications because the expectations weren't really there. We weren't living with each other, which brings a whole nother.
You mean expectations for like the amount? Okay.
Yeah, like the frequency. Because I guess there was a kind of a not hidden, but unsaid expectation. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. We weren't together all the time in college, right? You didn't sleep over at my house every night. Which means when we saw each other, we usually had intimate moments.
Not all the time. I mean, maybe early on, but when I started...
Fairly frequently.
Yeah, but I'm saying, like, when I started staying at your house more consistently, like 3 times a week-ish. Yeah.
Yeah, what? 3 times a week, yeah. It was going down 3 times a week.
Okay, this is getting too far. It's going down. Who are you, Young John?
But moral of the story, there wasn't really any moments of like, oh, I don't feel like it, or let's just and because if it were, it'd be like, I'm just stay at my spot. I'll see you in a few days. I'll see you whenever we link up.
Yeah, I mean, no, because I don't feel like the only thing we did more than just have sex.
I agree. I agree. We did more than have sex, but we did have.
There was an outlet, rather. Like, if I did not want to engage in sexual activity that night, then I could stay home. Yes. In comparison to when you live with somebody, if you don't want to have sex, you should put on the closed up, very hard to get into pajamas.
Yeah, exactly. And it didn't have to be a conversation then, right? Back then it was like, I'm gonna head to the crib, or no, I'm not coming through tonight. Okay, cool. I'll see you later.
Yeah.
And that changed when we started living together, right? And obviously it changed before then.
Yeah, I was going to say it changed before then.
But, yeah, it changed for different reasons. So that's another thing, right? Because we said when it was like, okay, now that we're engaged, I kind of want to reset. I don't want to have sex during this period of time. So there was, even though it was hard, there was like it was a clear, logical reason in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing, right, was like, as we moved out of our college phase and was early in our careers, I got very clear on like my spiritual journey and where I wanted to be at, and that was one of the things that I felt like was clouding my relationship with God.
Yep.
And so, so I was like, okay, I want to pause here. Engagement period. I made that clear. I mean, a little bit before it, made it clear that was how I wanted to engage with the engagement. Yes, I mean, I think those pieces were clear. And then, we got married.
Yeah, and I think you hit on a good point. Like, you made it clear before we even were engaged that even though it was still tough when it actually did happen, and it was like, okay, this is actually what we're doing, it did prepare me a little bit. So that little bit of a warning kind of got me right as well, and started, having me thinking about my spiritual journey as well. But it didn't just come out of nowhere. And that was helpful.
Yeah, so I mean, once we got into the married phase, I think automatically I thought, because we had had this engagement period where we weren't having sex, newlywed, like that's what everybody talks about. So I was like, oh, okay, like it's going to be easy to jump right back into it. And that was not the case for me. Like, I was fairly content not having sex like super frequently anymore. And I think that was challenging at first for me, even because I can imagine for you, but I mean, even for me, because it was like, oh, like, what's wrong? Like, what's happening? And then I know that took me into a very different space spiritually, where I was like, oh, like, is this like a punishment for the sex that I had before marriage? So now I can't have sex when I'm actually married. Like, what is all of this that's happening? And so that was challenging to feel like I was dealing with internally by myself as well too. Because one, I did not have a whole bunch of married friends. I actually didn't have any married friends at this point in time to talk to about it. And then I knew you were dealing with it in a different way, so it was challenging to like truly be open about where I was struggling at with it as well too.
100%. Yeah, it's just where you had the expectation that it would just be back, business as usual. I did too. It's like, oh, it's going to be just as it was before the engagement period. And when it wasn't, that was hard for me to deal with as well. And I dealt with a lot of things thinking like, well, what's wrong with me? Right? Why isn't she as interested as we once were? And even as much as you told me it had nothing to do with me, it's hard for somebody to believe that. And not saying that we had zero sex. It just wasn't at the level that we had before we were married. And the expectation was there, right? So it was an unfilled expectation. And that was difficult to deal with, especially with physical touch being, my number one love language at the time. And I think we talked about this in the love languages video with, physical touch. If you were abstaining from sex, you didn't want to do all the other types of physical touch, which would lead to it. So it was almost like an unlearning of those things. And then when we, once we became married, those things didn't exist as frequently, along with sex not existing as frequently either. So it felt like I wasn't being loved the way I wanted to. In those moments, it was difficult to express how I felt without feeling guilty for how I was feeling, because I'm not really one to complain about most things. Well, especially early in a marriage, I really wasn't good at communicating things that I wasn't happy about. I kind of just took it on the shoulder. But when you live with somebody and you see them on a daily basis, you were able to pick up on like when I wasn't feeling great about something. It was really hard to hide it, even though I thought I was hiding it well.
I think the biggest thing is like thinking about the expectation overall, right? And so I don't think there was any way to plan for that. It was just one of those things that truly get smacked with, like, for better or for worse, like in the beginning, right? Because just how we named, like, we both had pretty much the same expectation, but physically it just wasn't there in the way that it had been. And so it's just like, oh, okay, like both of us are now grappling with this thing and we didn't know how to grapple with it together. So yes, I mean, I think that was the first step, right? And then thinking about all the different things that we tried and thought about. And I mean, there would be phases where it would be similar to how it had been previously, and then kind of shift, kind of change. And so that actually led me to decide to get off birth control, which I had been on since college. And I was like, okay, well, let me just like see what happens like when I completely remove this from the equation. And so
you get pregnant.
Yeah.
That's what happens.
Yeah, you don't have much time to figure out what happens. But yeah, I mean, it really did happen quickly. Like, I got off, and the thing was, my doctor told me to wait 3 months to just like let my body regulate, and in that 3 months we were pregnant.
I think one thing that I learned is to be more intentional in how I love you. And I think it was easy to get into a routine. Routine isn't sexy.
Mm-hmm. It was very much like, okay, here he come. He about to do the same old. Right, we know it's about to happen right now. So, I mean, yeah, I think while you are already dealing with just the lack of energy, desire to engage, you then have the lack of spontaneity, the very like routine, same old, that you're also just like, okay, and this ain't helping. So yeah, I mean, those are also challenging conversations to have as well too. Or
challenging to receive. Dang. So you telling me I'm whack? Nah. I mean, and the thing was, it was always like, once we got to the point, it's like, okay, yeah, it's great, we enjoy each other. But sometimes getting to that point was more difficult. And my mind, I'm like, it's only so much I can do, right? And that's the thing I had to think a little bit more about, and I have to continuously think more about.
Yeah, it's sometimes you used to be doing some super random stuff. Now would send me like 50 new positions to try. Why are you texting this to me?
Yeah, they said you got to keep it interesting.
Why are you texting this to me?
I was trying everything. But that learning and those conversations is what birthed Making Love. Start with all of the things that have nothing to do with the physical act, because in reality, that's what making love is about. Right? It's not just the physical act. That's a tiny portion of it. You know, it's all the things that made us fall in love with each other in the first place, and really keying in on that. The thing is, I can't do that every day, and finding that balance of, okay, how do I do the grandiose gestures? How do I do the ones that, you know, maybe not tiny, but still are thoughtful, that would put you in the mindset of, okay, yeah, this does feel good, this does feel intimate, this does feel romantic, versus the, all right, it's about time for me to go to work. Roll over.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there was also the balance of like doing those things and not expecting it to turn into a physical act afterwards as well too. And I think that was like also the balance we're still figuring out, right?
100%.
Where it's like, okay, well, like, yeah, I ran you a bath and gave you a massage. That doesn't have to mean like, oh, okay, that we're automatically having sex tonight too. Like, I did these things because I also wanted you to relax and enjoy them. So yes, I think it was like figuring out that balance as well too, because there was a period of time where for a while it was like, okay, well, like every time this happened, I already know what this means too. And so it just goes to show that you can really start to do some of those romantic things, but they can also become very routine if you're not intentional with it.
Yeah, I am very formulaic, right? Okay, this plus this means this is gonna happen. All right, let me go ahead and pencil that in and do it here. All right. No?
No.
Okay, all right.
That's how humans work.
Exactly. It's hard not to do something that involves a level of intimacy and not want to have the physical part to it. It's my nature, it's my love language. And for a long time, like early in our marriage, like when it didn't happen the way that I wanted to, I was like, oh, come on, I'm doing all this work. Give me something.
And it was very much for me like, you should be doing all this work because you want to do all this work.
Yeah.
Not because you think every time you do this, it's going to lead to sex.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, that was that was a challenge.
It was.
To overcome. And so, I mean, I know I definitely felt like I was starting to overcome it, right? In those 3 months, I'm like, okay, so yeah, maybe the birth control, maybe the hormones has had an impact, had something to do with it. Starting to feel like I'm getting my little mojo back, and boom, you got your mojo back, all right?
You got your mojo back. You about to be gone in 9 months. And I don't know where they came up with this counting for pregnancy. Whitney was pregnant for 1.5 years.
That was dramatic.
That's how I felt.
That was dramatic. But no, I mean, I think it was very, you know, that Brooke is our first kid, maybe our only kid. But I mean, I think about, you know, just how unprepared you are going into pregnancy the first time. And I mean, I think every kid is different, so you know, who knows what it may be like with another kid or whatnot. But I know, just like in that first couple of months, like it was still like a very like hit to us where it was like, I'm tired.
Yes.
I don't know why I'm so tired. Probably because I'm growing a whole human inside of me. But you know, thinking about all of those components there, where it was just like, yep, like all of these things lead to not wanting to have sex. And that's not the case for everybody. That was just my situation, of course. But we had that stuff. And then I think there's also the shifts for me very much like in my body. And so knowing that I was dealing with like all of these changes physically, emotionally. And so I'm like, yeah, like I don't feel sexy. Right. And it doesn't matter. It didn't matter how much she said, oh, you're so beautiful. You look so great. You're growing our baby. My belly big. And that's all it is. I used to have abs and they gone. Like that's all, you know, I could think about like my belly button used to be in. Now it's starting to poke out. Like, just go away. Just back up.
Yeah, it was always tough to deal with. It's like, no matter how beautiful I think she is, how sexy I think she looks in this moment, she's not going to believe me. Fully believe me.
Well, it wasn't even that I didn't think you thought it. It was, I didn't feel that way. And I think that was like one of the biggest things for me, where it was like, yes, you can believe that. There are days where you're like, oh, your butt looks amazing. I'm like, my butt is huge right now. Like, what are you talking about? And so, I mean, I think, you know, we can have differing views. But for me, it's definitely like, okay, well, I gotta feel the sexy. I gotta feel good about it right now too, in order for me to really feel like I want to engage in that way too. Yeah,
no, I agree 100%. And that was like the second, I guess, wrench in the plans. You being tired, not feeling sexy. It was such a drastic change so quickly that I was not as empathetic as I should have been. I remember a conversation we were having by the stairs, and you broke down when we were in that conversation, and I was like, okay, I get it now. Like, and in that moment, it was like, you're the only thing that mattered, right? If you don't feel good about this, and it's making you feel this way, like my little problem, my little selfishness does not matter at all. And I think that was a shift for me. Not saying that I did it perfectly or reacted in the best way, you know, every single time after that, but that did change my mindset.
It was very much in a space, I think, at that point in time for me, where it was like, yep, like, I want to understand where he's coming from and like how to support him, and like also like I got a whole bunch of stuff I'm dealing with, like growing a whole human right now and still trying to function as normal. And so so I mean, I think it was just like one of those things where definitely naming it was not the sexiest thing, and that wasn't always the case, but there were definitely times where I did have to wrap my head around that, and it was like, yes, like, this is something that you know he needs. This is like how he operates. So how do you compromise? I think, I know you're about to say like queen of both and, but yes, like there is really like a reality where it's like, okay, no, like I don't want to. I don't feel like it. This no is a no. And then there are times where it's like, I don't really want to, but I also know like this is what my spouse needs. And this is like how they feel love. And so because of that, I want to engage. Not because I actually have the desire or need, but I want to engage because I want my spouse to feel loved in the way that they need to feel loved like in this moment.
That's such a complex thought.
It's super complex.
Yeah, like even while you're saying it, I'm like, your feminist friends are gonna be going off. But it's one of those things like you gotta be in that particular moment.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's
to understand it fully.
I think it's a choice that each individual has to make as well, right? Like, I think you're gonna have I do not necessarily consider myself on the feminist end of the spectrum. So I named that up front. Like, I still ascribe to certain gender roles and things of that nature. So I named that up front. But I do think that everybody has to identify what works for them in their relationship. Like, I think you have the one end of the spectrum. I mean, even when we were reading relationship goals, right, where it was like, if your husband wants to, like, you got to. And I was like, that's a bit much for me. Like, I don't know if I can get down with that.
Yeah. Sounds a little rapish.
Yeah. And so, I think it's just like everybody has their own ends of the spectrum, right? I think you have the people who are like, nah, like, it's my body. I don't want to. I don't feel like it. I'm not going to. Your choice. Also, your choice if you want to, engage in that way every time that your spouse wants to. Your choice. Like I said, I feel somewhere in the middle, and I think my choice is rooted more so in like how I want to show love versus the act of just like doing it to do it. Like, so I think that's like where it comes from for me. But I mean, I think when I think about the phase of recovery, like that part was actually probably the hardest one for me. More so because I'm thinking to myself, like, maybe I just need to, like, reshape what my expectations are, like, every time I go into a new phase. Because I'm like, like, baby's going to be out. I'm going to feel better. Be great. And recovery was worse than pregnancy. I won't even say, like, maybe. No, it was. It was
easily.
Worse. Yeah. And so I think I knew that there was, some things that would be different as you were recovering and figuring out how your body's going to operate again. But there were just like some things I just was not prepared for at all. And I think that was like one of the really hard pieces. And I just remember it was like within like the first week, and Donovan was like, hey. I was like, bruh, it ain't even been a week since I done pushed the baby out. If you don't get away from me.
It's been so long.
Yeah, friend, you were. Yeah, just like that. But I mean, it was one of those things that like I remember like just straight up looking at him and being like, you kidding? So I'm gonna just ignore like you right now.
Yeah, I remember that as well, which led to more conversations. And the whole thing around this is like, and as we talk about these phases, obviously this wasn't like our whole relationship, right?
Yeah.
These were pockets, but you always remember the harder pockets of time. But each one gave me a glimpse of another phase where we had that same problem. So it almost, in my mind, sometimes felt like it was
just like this super long
time. Exactly. And it was easy for me to almost forget like how good, like the good moments, right? Which outweighed actually the bad ones or the moments where I felt that way. But like I said, when it was reminiscent of other pockets where I had the same problem, it was easy just to like take it out of my mind. And that was one thing that I had to be more cognizant about, understanding like two things. One, like, like it was all good just a week ago. And then two, like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing to make the situation better. And that's something that stuck with me that I think about often, because the thing that always kind of baffled me was like, we always enjoy the moments. So it's like, okay, if we know we enjoy it, we know that it's good, why is it so hard to get to the point?
And so I think it's just like one of those things where the communication has to be super clear.
Yes.
And I am really glad that we had the window of time, 4 years pretty much before we went into having a baby, because it did allow us to have those challenging sexual tension moments and things of that nature where we were able to communicate fairly clearly, like once we got into a parity phase. Not always, as clear as we might have liked or as we wanted to, but we were able to at least know how to share, like, this is kind of where I'm at, or this is like what's going on with me. I know you don't understand it 100%, but this is what I need you to understand right now in this moment.
With you being the primary parent, and not saying you do everything, but you do take on the majority of the load. And there's a whole another level of tired that comes along with that. But all of those years of all of those different phases prepared us for this. Not saying that it's perfect, but we've learned each other really well.
I mean, I think it's like the piece that wasn't super clear in the beginning was like the invisible load of motherhood that is just like there, right? And so, for me, that was also part of where social media was actually like really affirming for me in those early phases where I was like, actually, like, I'm gonna follow a bunch of moms and like I'm gonna follow these different accounts about motherhood, where it was like, yes, like, do you have toilet paper in the house? It's because I went out and ordered it, or I went out and got it. Like, have you run out of lotion or soap, toothpaste? No, it's because I made sure it happened while also making sure that your child was fed, changed, and did my job, because I also still have a full-time job as well, right? And so I think it was like all of those components that started to help me process what I was feeling and then being able to articulate that.
Yeah.
And so I think that was like the biggest piece where I was able to be like, yes, like, here's what I'm feeling and experiencing that I didn't necessarily know how to name before. Now let me like apply this and share this, like, hey babe, like, here are all the components of what I'm dealing with and actually feeling in this one moment.
Yep. And it's funny, I think about me being formulaic. You're like, I don't always want to because I'm tired. All right, what's making you tired? Give it all to me. I'll do everything. You know what? You just stay in the room and just sit. I'll go do everything.
And it would be so hard for him in the beginning because he'd just be like, just sleep. Just stay in bed and sleep. And then you'll want to have sex. No.
Yeah, like, you saying that is because you're tired.
And like, he could not understand. Away. Like, yeah, like, I slept for an extra hour. That does not mean that I want to have sex right now. Like, so while you were super formulaic, there are very formulaic aspects of how I think as well. And so I think for me, it also became very easy to be like, okay, so Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, haven't had sex. Yep, probably gonna be having sex about this day, because about approximately every 3 to 4 days, if he doesn't, he's gonna get an attitude and he's gonna feel this way. And so it became somewhat formulaic in a way for me as well, and I had to get out of like keeping score of when it was happening, because one goes right into what we said from the very beginning, like, you really lose that spontaneity. And then two, it was also starting to make me bitter in some ways, where I'm like, didn't we just have sex 2 days ago? Like, what is the problem? Like, I don't understand. We just did it. And so I used to always laugh when I was, young in college, and I'd watch those movies and people be like, yeah, like, we have sex on Saturdays, or like every Tuesday, that's our night. And I'd be like, this is jokey, like they have for scheduling sex.
Yeah, you started.
But yeah, then I started doing it in my head, and I was like, well, at least I'm not writing it down in the agenda. Like, it's the same thing.
Same thing.
So, but it was one of those pieces where, one, I really understood what people meant when they were doing it, and then two, like, it really pushed me to think about just all the components, right? Like, I do think there were like physical barriers at times, and so those things cannot be overlooked.
Yeah.
And so, but it was important for me to figure out ways to actually talk about those physical barriers, which was not always the case. Like, there were months where there were physical barriers that I didn't feel comfortable talking about with you. And so I think about those components. But then when you start thinking about the actual emotional barriers or components that just are different, lacking, changed because of the nature of the relationship, I think that's where the communication piece to shift and change those things in ways that feel really good for you and your partner are super crucial.
Definitely. Now, what would you say are the learnings from all of this? Like, what went well? What do you feel like makes it better or easier?
I mean, I think it just goes to the things that I named around communication and like being able to communicate with you. Like, I do feel comfortable being able to be like, I really don't feel up to it today, and being able to name sometimes where that's coming from, and also being able to say, I really don't know where it's coming from, but this is where I'm at right now. I think that's one thing. I think two, not keeping the schedule or the score, and just like being able to acknowledge, like, yep, like we may go a week without. Okay, what does that mean for our interactions? Like, what does that mean for the choices that we decide to make from there? We may go another week and go 3-4 times that week. Like, it's not a formula. It's just like us operating however feels good to us. It's more, a lot of it honestly deals with me and my mental space. And so I know that when I am able to really decompress and not think about so much, I'm able to be more in the moment and just enjoy the moment. When I feel like there are so many competing priorities and factors, it's just like so hard to think about anything else. And so I think we do a really good job of just like overall acknowledging that as a team, where it's like, seems like you got a lot on your plate right now. Like, what might be helpful? Or, hey, how about you take some time to actually just like go write it out and get that, get it cleared out, so that you can actually say, okay, these things are going to happen here. These things are going to happen when? Because sometimes I think that it's just as simple as that, right? Like I got 11,000 things to do and I don't know when they're going to happen. So yes, I would say I think that's probably the biggest thing for me. I think there are definitely some like very intentional gestures that you do that are helpful, but more so than anything, it really has a lot to do with my mental space. And then this last piece being around like really being able to make a choice that feels good for me. To want to engage with you in that way. And I think knowing that, if I'm asking myself, like, do you want to have sex tonight solely because it would make him happy? Like, if the answer is yes, then I usually say no those nights. If it's like, no, actually, like, I just am not thinking about sex, but I could go for sex.
It's like a cheeseburger.
I could go for sex. I'm not thinking about it, but I could go for it. And I know this would make him happy. Then that's usually a yes. And then there are nights where I'm like, I really want to have sex with my husband. And those nights happen, right? So I think it's like also thinking about those different questions or components. And like I said, those have to be true for you as an individual and like what feels good for you. But yeah, I think for me, I never want to feel like we're in a situation where I'm just like truly having sex just because you want to.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't feel good to either one of us.
That's
we had
whack.
that conversation,
Yeah,
we had
that's
that
whack.
dialogue, and that doesn't feel good to either one of us. And so, like I said, I think, yeah, like it may not be sexy to think about sex as a cheeseburger, but it's also the reality of sex in marriage. Like, there are sexier sex moments
Yeah.
than others. And I think that's one of the things that I know I truly wasn't prepared for going into marriage. Like, I just
Yeah.
thought it like, oh, I had to be sexy. And yeah, like I went to Victoria's Secret. Like, yeah, girl, I'm about to give me some. First of all, them things give you wedgies. I ain't here for it.
But where we are now, how intimately I know you,
Yep.
right? The moments that we share now, how intentional I have to be. Like, I feel like college Donovan knew, you know, this much about Whitney, right? I thought I knew that much, but like Donovan now knows it all.
No, you don't.
I know it all.
Okay, see, that's part of the
I
problem.
know it all. But no, like I know I've learned so much about you, and we've grown so much together through the difficult times, and all of that comes through in those moments. Like real romance happens, and I think for me that was something that we didn't have. You have to grow to that. You have to get to know your partner. You have to understand exactly what it is that makes them click.
I mean, I would say we had real romance. I think we have a mature romance
Okay,
now.
that's fair.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, because I think there's this aspect, right, that like when you have young love, fresh love, like everything that happens in it is still just as real as
Fair.
the 20, 30-year loves. But those have more maturity to them, right?
Yes, yeah.
They have the tests and trials that have sustained those relationships. They have those components that have made them stronger and deeper.
Yeah.
But the love, the romance, all of those components are still very much alive and true.
And real. Yeah. For me as a husband, I think the journey has been difficult but necessary. There were some harder lessons and conversations that had to be had for us to get to the point where we're growing in a more healthy way, more intimate, really learning how to love each other exactly how we want to be loved.
Conversation and reflection, I think, is like super crucial in getting through humps like these.
It's so important. We always talk about communication being a pillar. Like, if we weren't able to open and honestly communicate with each other, which we saw, that was one of the toughest things for us to talk about, but it was the most important thing for us to talk about in those moments. And we had to grow to do it. It did not happen well a lot of the times. We do it a lot better now, but that communication was key. Well, we came, we did what we said we were going to do. We talked about sex. I think it was a topic that we needed to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, when we were struggling with it, it felt like nobody else was struggling with it. And part of that could have been, of course, like, we wasn't just out there talking about it as a problem.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it was definitely something that I was like, dang.
Pride, right? Who wants to say that? Just come out and say, sex is a issue for us right now. That's tough, and it's easier to talk about it now that life is easier in that regard. Yeah, we talked about suffering in Bible study, right? Nobody knows how to really transparently talk about what they're dealing with in that moment, and some people don't know how to respond. But I think if you have people who are in similar stages or phases of life, like your village we talked about on Instagram today, I think it's important to have those open, honest conversations with them as well. And y'all are our village. So we talking about it with y'all. that's all I got.
All right, y'all. Well, we appreciate y'all tapping in with us again.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
We hope that you enjoy your month of love.
Whole lot of love.
Whatever that looks like for you, whether it is engaging in the act or not.
Love anyway.
All right, y'all. From the Williams.
With love. Oh, you're not going to blow your kiss like you did last week?
Wow.
For the month of love?